welcome back to Room 237 as I continue my marathon of Italian horror and Giallo films. And for this, I'm doing Massimo Dallamano's follow-up to his 1972 Giallo, What Have You Done to Solange, with 1974's What Have They Done to Your Daughters. This is, of course, the Arrow Blu-ray. And this is actually the only Arrow release or any release with reversible cover art that I did not flip over for the original cover art. And this is different than what you'll see on the thumbnail as well. And reason being is because I actually like this more because this is actually not just a straightforward Giallo. Because what was happening was, of course, 1974 was pretty much the year Giallo was really dying out, or at least really starting to wane and not be the flagship genre from Italy. 70 to 74 was really the heyday for Giallo. Between 74 and 75, there were these hybrid films because something known as Poliziotteschi film, if I pronounce that correctly, which are more police procedural, more action, more so Law and Order than just people sleuthing, like these noir kind of murder mysteries. So between 74 and 75, there were these hybrids between the two, and that's what this is. And then from 75 and on, Poliziotteschi was the superior reigning subgenre of Italy. Sorry I'm stuttering so much. I don't know why. Of course, there were gialli still made in the late 70s, but of course they weren't always all that good. So this is the only legit hybrid with any real Poliziotteschi genre in it. I haven't seen a straightforward Poliziotteschi film. I do have one. My friend Joe sent me Contraband by Lucio Fulci, which I still need to check out. The closest thing I could probably compare to with this would be probably My Dear Killer. That was one of the more police procedural kind of gialli at the time. But also, if you want to get more modern, I have reviewed Dario Argento's Card Player, and I said in that felt more like an episode of like CSI or something, or like Law and Order. That's actually more of what this feels like. Because actually, we don't get a whole lot of the leather helmet-clad killer with a butcher cleaver, which of course this look has also been seen in, it was a strip nude for your killer. It would go on to appear in the slasher film Night School and Nightmare Beach, all of which I've reviewed. I could say it was a decent film, and as far as a follow-up to his Schoolgirls in Peril trilogy, the whole schoolgirl aspect of it is very underplayed. Yes, it does deal with schoolgirls being killed, and then actually there's really only one, and that's the girl in the beginning who's already dead when the film opens. But there is something happening to them that is a crime, which I'll get to. But we don't really see them in school. They're not really major characters. It's more behind the scenes with law enforcement, them trying to solve the case. So with that, I would say this one is actually the most different in genre and tone and atmosphere and just the way it plays out. It's the most different of the three. Even with Red Rings of Fear not being a film by Dallamano, because of course he would pass away. I believe the following year, maybe it was 76. 76. So 2 years after this came out. So he did get to do the third part. But the screenplay was by Dallamano and Ettore Sanzo. Story by Ettore Sanzo. Music by Stelvio Cipriani, who actually has also done, I know there's other ones, Human Cobras, which I haven't seen, Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, which I have on order. I'll be getting that soon. Bay of Blood, Death Walks on High Heels, Devil Has Seven Faces, which I'm going to try to get, Bear in Blood, which I've done, Killers on the Phone, that's another Giallo on my list of hard to find. What It Done to Your Daughter, Rabid Dogs. So yeah, he's done a lot of films. And the score is very different. I mean, even the score is a blend of Giallo and Poliziotteschi. You have like the Morricone Giallo sound, but then you have like the sort of 70s cop with like the horn section and more bluesy or jazzy, kind of more action-y music. So it's a good blend that way too. And it stars Giovanna Raleigh, who actually kind of looks like a Susan Scott in this film, almost. Claudio Casanelli, who he has a very distinct look to him, and he looks really familiar. Suspicious Death of a Minor, which I'll be doing next. Scorpion with Two Tails, which I like to get. He was also in Murder Rock, which I have done. I'm guessing that's what I've seen him in. Mario Adorf, Franco Fabrizi, and there's a brief appearance by Farley Granger, who was in the Hitchcock films Rope and Strangers on a Train. He was in the Giallo So Sweet, So Dead, which I've reviewed. Now, the film opens up with a young 14-year-old girl who's appeared to have hanged herself. And there's the DA, played by Giovanna Raleigh. If you hear a noise, it's the dog's nails getting caught on the rug because he can't sit still. Valentini, but then he hands the case off to Inspector Silvestri, played by Casanelli. They find out the 14-year-old is pregnant. She seems to be having kind of a troubled, before she died, had a bit of a troubled life. Like, her mother found out she was taking birth control pills. Her father, she even threatened suicide when her mother threatened to tell the father about the pregnancy and the pills. Her father set her up with a psychiatrist. And then her mother hired a private investigator to kind of follow her around. But while Silvestri is checking out the crime scene, he notices someone with a camera. So he brings the guy in. It's this guy Bruno, or Paglia, I think is what he's going by, because there's something that happens later on. And he has a bunch of pictures of the girl alive in the room, making love to someone. Apparently the reel was like 3 weeks old. They think it's a boyfriend because he's in every picture. But come to find out, he has an alibi. Which also, another thing about this movie, and I'm guessing it's common for all Poliziotteschi films, is that this isn't more so about clues. It's more about actual police work. Because, like, when there's not really, I can't really remember any red herrings or any kind of misdirects in this. Like, okay, there's seemingly a boyfriend in these pictures. Let's go check him out. Oh, he has an alibi. Let's move on. Uh, Also, when they get the tire marks from his bike, they get a mold of it, and then they find out the make of the tire, who bought that, what kind of bike it takes, who bought those kind of tires in the last 3 years. More actual police work than sleuthing and finding clues. I mean, I'm sure that makes obvious sense, but so then eventually they go to this one apartment where, because they think the girl was killed somewhere else and then placed in that room, which there was a nice touch where someone says they really knew how to make her look hanged because they pulled on her feet to break and separate the vertebrae. I thought that was a nice touch. But Silvestri thinks he knows where she was actually killed. It was in this one apartment, but they don't know who's renting it because the guy whose name is on the lease has been dead for 3 years. But they go in the bathroom and there's blood spatter everywhere. And for someone whose dream job is blood spatter, and I've studied blood spatter for the last few years, I have textbooks. It looks cool. I mean, I love the look of blood spatter, but it's pretty unbelievable. There's too many places of origin, and it's really erratic, and some of it is more consistent with bludgeonings, and yeah, you can tell they dressed the room to make it look like a bloody mess. It looks great, I'll say that. They decide to look into the private investigator, because this is where they find out one was hired. But they can't find him. Eventually they find out he's married, but also has a lover who's a secretary, who's in a hospital from a car accident. But they find his car, which has been abandoned for a few days. They look in the trunk and they find his hacked up body. So he's the one that was hacked up in the bathroom. There is kind of a funny scene where when they put him together in the morgue, which, I mean, the guts and stuff look cool, but the skin, I get they make it look kind of green, so he looks kind of decomposed. But yeah, he looks more like some kind of material, not flesh. But his wife comes in to ID him, and she's like, I want to see all of them. They're like, that's not necessary. She said, I want to see how that bastard ended up. She didn't know he got hacked completely, puzzled up. So when they pull the sheet back, she freaks out. I thought that was funny. And so basically, what they're looking for, actually, before I get to that, this is where the film really picks up. I mean, that's the first half hour, so that's the first act. But then the secretary calls Silvestri from the hospital, saying, oh, I actually did have something to tell you. Please hurry and come back so I can tell you. If you watch Giallo films, you know she's going to die before he could get there. And before she made the call, we saw the leather-clad, helmeted killer go into the hospital. That's at 34 minutes. That's how long it takes to see the killer. He attacks her, and we even hear a voice say, I'm going to hack you up like your boyfriend unless you tell me where the stuff is. We don't know what the stuff is yet. And there's this weird camera angle where it's up in her face, and then right after he says that, she screams, and the camera goes in more. There's even fog on the lens. There are some cool camera angles. I wouldn't say it's as stylish as Solange, but it's still very well shot. Some of the acting, like Casanelli, he kind of reminds me of like when South Park does like their Bruckheimer voice, like the sheriff's department. Like, how are we gonna do it? Like, just kind of over the top. But then when Silvestri shows up, she's still alive. And then there's a car chase. He gets away. Even though he goes in a train tunnel and then a train comes out, apparently he's fine. The stuff, which she points out, is in the vent in her room. And I think the paper was money. It looked like cash and some audio reels. And what's on the reels is really what is the what have they done to your daughters and the schoolgirls in peril, not just a 14-year-old girl who was killed in the beginning, but it's all these tapes of these sex sessions with schoolgirls, and it's a prostitution ring, this very well organized prostitution ring with all these underage schoolgirls. And it starts off kind of like, well, hi, how are you? Have you ever been here before? And the girls are like, no, I haven't. And it gets more kind of disturbing and violent as it goes on, which is a good way to set up the scene because we're pretty much just watching Casanelli and the DA's expression as they're listening to it from across the room. I thought that was a nice shot. So now, really, the whole film at that point is figuring out the one, the helmeted killer, and two, who is running this prostitution ring and how are they connected. And yeah, so that's the film. So I guess this would be a good time to get into spoilers. Personally, I mean, it's still a good film. It's still well directed. It does have some good twists and turns. Does have a good story. I do like the police procedural aspect of it. I mean, I love shows like the original Las Vegas CSI. I love Law and Order. But I am, as far as film, I am more of a Giallo fan. I'd much rather just watch Giallo than Poliziotteschi. I mean, they blend well, but it did feel like Poliziotteschi did overtake the film sometimes. And I do kind of wish it was more in tone with Solange because I enjoyed Solange so much. So, if you're like a straightforward Giallo fan, you might think, I mean, you still might dig it. It definitely has more action. It is more lively, especially with this car chases. But I do feel like this one was slower paced. And, I mean, it's almost 20 minutes shorter. It's 17 minutes shorter, but it felt longer. It does feel like it has more downer parts. But I still say it's well made. It's still worth checking out. So, that's Massimo Dallamato's, I believe it was his final film too, but 1974. What have they done to your daughters? So with that, I'll get into spoilers. So that first chase is how Silvestri gets the mold of the tire mark, which does turn out a possibility. Suppose as all these names come up for someone who's bought the tires recently, it does say what they do, and this one guy that's a butcher pops up. And they don't look too deeply into him. Every once in a while, they'll be like, oh, let's get the picture of the butcher out, or let's see who knows the butcher, and oh, let's get his picture on the news. It is more about finding the voices on the tape, which at one point the DA gets a threatening note put under her apartment door. That doesn't really go anywhere. I mean, Silvestri tells her we all get threatening notes, and then she tears it up. But, and then I think before or after that, Silvestri's listening to the tape, and then when he goes, he recognizes a voice, and he goes to see Valentini, who we haven't seen since the beginning of the film, and he tells him that one of the voices on the tape is his daughter's voice. Because we did see him with his daughter in the beginning of the film, so that's how we would know it. And of course, he's super upset. And there is a great acting moment when he goes to pick her up from school, and Silvestri says, bring her in, but try not to upset her. And when he goes to pick her up, there is this great acting moment where he's looking at her and he puts his hand on her shoulder. She's not suspecting anything. It's like he's looking at her, he sees his daughter, he knows what she's been doing or been put through. It's like he's fighting back tears, and he's trying to think of what to say, but he's, speechless. Very good acting moment, at least I thought. So eventually they bring her in for questioning. But first, the DA is attacked in the parking garage, and there are some cool camera angles. Like, especially when he's chasing after her, the camera stays, like, right behind him. So you do get some cool, stylish camera work in that scene. But she makes it to the elevator, and of course, she notices, because she can see when she hits a different floor, how slow it's going. So when it gets to her floor, he cleaves right through it. But then he cleaves through the door, or the wall, and then the superintendent comes in, he runs off. But, so now it's like a huge manhunt for him. They're pretty sure it's the Butcher. Which the reason why they picked out Butcher was because I think it was when the secretary was attacked in the hospital, they found one of his cleavers. So they talked to Valentini's daughter, and she says that she has a friend who, because she says she doesn't know, the appointments with the Johns are set up by phone call, but she doesn't know who calls or who any of the Johns are, but she has a good friend who might know. This girl, I can't remember her first name, but she calls her BG. And she's like, she looks at Valentini, it's like, you know her, right, Papa? And he's like, yeah. He looks at Silvestri, and he's like, yeah, they've known each other since they were babies. I've never really liked her. I thought that was a funny moment, too. And, of course, she's like a brat. She's all like, yeah, so what? I didn't think she was a very good actress either. But also, for some of the characters, her especially, the dubbing isn't very good. She mentions... Well, first, as she's being taken away by police, we see a payphone, and Bruno is making a phone call. And he says, she hasn't seen my face, but some of the others have, or she's seen some of the others, and we could all be in trouble. And the voice on the phone says, well, if any of them talk, they'll be dropped like a red-hot potato. Those are his words. So now we know Bruno is in on it. And she says, the friend tells Silvestri and the DA that Bruno is the one who recruits the girls and calls to set up the appointments. But I guess they don't know his name is Bruno. They must have just known him by his last name because they asked who Bruno is. Or maybe they weren't thinking of him, which would have been weird because they know he's a peeping Tom and taking pictures of underage girls. So, but even when she says Bruno, they ask who he is. Like, they don't really be like, Bruno, like, that guy? It's not until they're in the car going after him and the radio says Bruno Paglia when Silvestri says, who, the photographer? I knew it. But on their way to, you know, talk to him, he looks like he's trying to flee town. Knock on the door, he opens it, he's stabbed in the gut. But then when he's in the ambulance, Silvestri's in there with him. And this is kind of funny too because he's trying to get him to talk, and the EMT is like, he's in shock. He's not going to talk to you. And he's like, well, I need him. I need him to talk. Can you give him a shot to make him conscious or something? He dies anyway. And but in any case, Silvestri then tells the press, case is solved. Bruno's still alive. He told us everything. I'll fill you in on everything tomorrow. Obviously, this is a tactic to draw out the killer. But then we see that the psychiatrist has committed suicide. The psychiatrist that Sylvia's dad set her up with. He slid his wrist in the tub. And at his funeral, they're filming the funeral march, and they notice this one girl who we haven't seen before, but they find out who she is. They bring her for questioning. And she says, yeah, the doctor, the psychiatrist or psychologist, whatever, used to drug me, and I could tell he was doing stuff to me, but, I was drugged. I couldn't fight back. Sometimes there was other girls there. Sometimes there was other men there. And while she's telling the DA this, Silvestri and some officers go into the doctor's office, and they find a list of all the names of everyone involved. So he wrote down everything, which was foreshadowed in the beginning, because when he first goes to meet with the doctor after her dad, Farley Granger, tells him that she set her up with this doctor, he says, oh, it's a common problem with teenage girls. Here's a list of other girls who might have the same issue. So he makes a list of people and writes everything down. But, so then they go to someone real high up. It says, well, can we indict these people? Because they say, well, this one's the minister. And they're talking to someone, they might not be able to get indictments because a lot of these people are very powerful, and it might just get swept under the rug. And then Silvestri is just told to focus on the killer, which they find out where the butcher lives, because these two young girls make a call because they saw him on TV. So they set up, this big ambush at his apartment building, which right when he comes down on his bike, he's shot. And when they take the helmet off, we only got to see like a black and white out of focus photo of him, so it didn't really matter when they took the helmet off. But yeah, it's not like Giallo where the killer is someone we've seen all along, or at least at some point throughout the film. All we saw was a photo. But yeah, that's what I mean. Like the killer really took a back seat to this. It was more about the prostitution ring and I mean, even though he had cool scenes, it was more about solving this prostitution ring. And yeah, the doctor was the head of it all and setting all of it up. And so then the last scene is really Silvestri again being told, like, hey, we're probably not going to be able to indict these people. And they even say, like, look, you already caught your killer. What else do you want? A promotion? Then he gets kicked out of the car. And this was right when Valentini has said that he's going to resign. So when the car drives off, Silvestri says, go fuck yourself. And then the DA says, I second that. And then Valentini rips up his resignation slip. And that's the end of the movie. And I mean, like I said earlier, it's still very solidly shot. It does have... The story is enough to keep you interested, want to see what the next twist or turn is going to be, or the next revelation. But, yeah, I did feel it did have some downer moments. I didn't like it as much as Solange, not nearly as much. Even though I do think it's a good blend of the two subgenres, it's a good transitional film. I've heard some people say call movies like Pieces a transition film from Giallo to slasher, and that just doesn't even make sense because it came out during the slasher boom. This is more of a transitional film, one that blends two genres in between peak of the two, on the downfall of one and the uprise of another. That's what a hybrid film is. And I do think it did do that well. But by the end of the film, it does kind of feel like the Giallo aspect did take more of a back seat, which was probably the intention because Poliziotteschi was becoming more popular. So, I mean, it does make sense. But for his last movie, which I'm going to double check just to make sure that was his last film before I definitively say that. If it was his final film, I mean, it's a good one to go out on. It's not a bad film at all. But, and again, from the three of the Schoolgirls and Peril trilogy, I will say, oh no, he also directed The Cursed Medallion and Cult 38 Special Squad. I think both of those are Poliziotteschi films. Cursed Medallion is an Italian film, also known as The Night Child. Okay. I'll have to check that out. But, it's not as stylish. The music is a good blend as well, with like the Morricone type Giallo sound and like the more bluesy, kind of upbeat police film kind of score. The acting was take it or leave it, but still, I thought it was solid. Just not as good as Solange. But yeah, so stay tuned for more Italian horror and Giallo films, and thank you for watching.